Good afternoon and welcome finally to panel 5, which is C, SEA. And if you're in here for C, then you're in the right place. I'm Marjorie Kaplan. I'm the Associate Director of Rutgers Climate Institute, and I also co-direct the New Jersey Climate Change Resource Center, which is housed here at Rutgers University. And I co-facilitate something called the New Jersey Climate Change Alliance. Can I just get a thumbs up from my colleague, Lisa Arammuller, that you can hear us okay? Excellent, thank you. I'm your moderator for this afternoon's panel, and this morning's plenary, for those of you who attended and for those who didn't, I'll just refresh. And the first set of panels we had today explored the contrast between Germany's Ruhr region and New Jersey and the planning challenges on both sides of the Atlantic in the context of people, place, and policy to explore how we can learn from one another in an era of climate change. And in this second set of panels, we switched gears a little bit to explore specifics about climate phenomena and the intersection with people, place, and policy. And our panel has the unique distinction in that we're going to explore the phenomenon of sea level rise. Although sea level rise isn't pertinent to the inland Ruhr region, it is indeed pertinent to New Jersey. And we're going to discuss experiences that we expect to be translational to inland areas. And just to frame the significance of the sea level rise phenomenon for New Jersey, our coastal zone boundary includes approximately 1,800 miles of tidal coastline, including 126 miles along the Atlantic Ocean front from Sandy Hook to Cape May, and approximately 53% of New Jersey's total population resides in the coastal zone, with thousands more people coming to visit these cities, towns, parks, beaches every single day and every year. And I also will be remiss if I don't mention that our coastline also makes its way up from Cape May all the way up from the tip of the state. It makes its way up to the north and to the west along the Delaware Bay shore and up to the head of tide in Trenton. So it's quite a lot of coastline that we deal with here. So we have we'll have short presentations from our illustrious panelists. Then we'll go move into a discussion, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. And a reminder for those of you attending remotely, please put your questions into the chat box, and we'll get to as many as we can during the Q&A. And so let me quickly introduce our panelists, whose fuller bios are on the conference website. We are joined by some of my favorite people, so this is a fun day for me. We're joined by my Rutgers colleague, Ms. Lisa Arammuller, the assistant manager of the Jacques Cousteau Coastal Education Center located at the Jersey Shore in Tuckerton, New Jersey. Lisa will be followed by Fawn McGee, who made the trek here from Trenton in person. Fawn is the director of the State of New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection's Blue Acres program. And Fawn will be followed by the fabulous Barbara Woolley Dillon, the Director of Planning and Development for the City of Atlantic City. So without further ado, I'd like to ask our trusty intern, Samantha, to help us with the slides. We're going to have Lisa start. Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Marge. And it's really an honor to be with you and this powerhouse team today to talk about sea level rise. I'm going to focus today on climate science and community-based resilience. Next slide. And, oh, can you go back one, Samantha? Well, my outline isn't coming out exactly right. It's somewhere down at the bottom of the slide there. But what I'm going to talk about today is climate-informed science. But first, I'm going to start with some definitions, just so we're all on the same page when I say something, you know what I mean. And then we're going to talk about a variety of tools that we've developed as a team at Rutgers in order to make the science very usable and useful. And then I'm going to finish by posing a question, which is, what does it really mean to be resilient? And then I will turn it over to Fawn. Next slide. So just starting with definitions, the classic definition for resilience from an ecological context really is about bouncing back to a previous state after an extreme occurrence. When we talk about resilience in this presentation, what I really mean is bouncing forward or making sure that our communities are thinking about being at a better or an improved state when they recover from something. Because not everyone wants to be back to where they were to begin with. So we're really talking about working with communities to make sure that they're in a better place than when they started as part of their long-term resilience planning. Next slide. Also, for the idea of resilience, this isn't like a one and done kind of thing. And so what we're talking about really is an iterative cycle of making sure you know what your risks and your vulnerabilities are. You work to plan for those, and then you work to implement actions to address what those vulnerabilities are. And then you kind of start that cycle again by evaluating where you are. And so resilience is not just a wake up one morning and it's done. It's something we're constantly working to achieve. And then my final definition is just the concept that one size doesn't fit all with resilience. And we all know, as Marjorie just said in our opening, there are so many different types of coastlines around New Jersey. We have the Delaware Bay Shore, we have the Back Bay communities, we have the more urban north, we have the barrier islands on the ocean side. And so resilience is going to look very different in all those places. And it's really important to work with the local community members to make sure that we meet with what their vision of resilience is for their community. Next slide, Samantha. So throughout my presentation, you're also going to see this icon of a puzzle. And that's because I think throughout the presentation, I'm going to keep referring to this analogy of putting these pieces together to work to improve community resilience. And probably the cornerstone for our Rutgers team when we work on community resilience is the use of science to help inform decision-making. Next slide. One of the processes that we are most proud of, and that is being used throughout our state right now in New Jersey, is a process that we've done called the Science and Technical Advisory Panel. And we did it once back in 2016, and then we did it again more recently in 2019 as the science was updated. And this was a process by which we pulled together a group of scientists within our state and within other federal agencies. And we brought them together to come to consensus on the most relevant science on sea level rise for the state of New Jersey, knowing that there's sea level rise numbers out there for the globe or for the nation, but really for making decisions for New Jersey, we wanted to be informed by the science that was specific to our state. So we produced this document with funding from the state of New Jersey. And next slide, Samantha. Probably one of the more useful outcomes of that document is this table of sea level rise values in the future. And we worked with the state to really make sure that what we produced was really useful in their decision-making, whether it was around regulations or giving guidance for municipalities. So in this table, you can see that we have sea level rise numbers at 20-year intervals. And then we look out further out from 2100 to 2150. And we look across a variety of emissions scenarios, emissions of being low, moderate, and high, and then give the likelihood of those sea level rise numbers being met. Really all to give people a range of choices that they could choose from based on their own risk tolerance when planning for sea level rise. Now, for some people, those numbers work great and they make sense, but not all of us are climate scientists. Next slide, Samantha. So what we really do is try to make those numbers make sense on the ground for the people that have to make decisions. Here's a slide, an image taken from a drone, and it's of the end of Long Beach Island. You have Holgate, the township, which is part of Long Beach Township. And then in the foreground out at the left edge of the slide, you can see the National Wildlife Refuge, the Holgate National Wildlife Refuge. And maybe even way in the background, you could see Barbara's Atlantic City sitting there back in the background. And what this slide is really to show you is that not all people need those numbers to understand that things are changing on our coast. Things are dramatically changing and they're changing quickly. This sea level rise isn't just something out into the future that we don't need to worry about. It's happening now, and our natural system is adapting and migrating and moving. as you can see in that wildlife refuge picture, while the rest of our built environment is working to try to stay put and to adapt to what's coming. And so we really work closely with communities to help them vision what they want for the future, and then help them to understand their choices of how to achieve that vision. Next slide. One of the ways we're very well known for doing that is to develop planning tools. We hope that these tools are useful and usable, but all of them are grounded in the science. Next slide. Our team of us at Rutgers that work together to provide these tools to local end users, we host them all under one umbrella called the NJ Adapt platform. And from that one website, you can branch out into the tool that would most meet your needs. The New Jersey Flood Mapper site has been out for about a decade now. Then we added the New Jersey Forest Adapt website, which really looks at how to adapt for natural areas and forest areas. And then the more recent addition were our municipal snapshots. Next slide, Samantha. All of our tools have been very, very built around what our users on the ground need, what our community members, county representatives, state representatives say they need to help inform their decision making. So we start with base maps like this one of, again, Barbara, Atlantic City. And then Samantha, if you could click again, we've worked with our decision makers to make sure we know how to show them the information that's most usable to them. So here we're showing a future scenario of a 2050 Sandy storm surge with a best estimate or a 50% chance of sea level rise. And you can see where you might expect to find inundation along our streets in Atlantic City. Go ahead, Samantha. And over that inundation, you can lay all sorts of other GIS layers on top. And we've worked with our users to understand what those are. So you can look at infrastructure, facilities, transportation, environmental hazards, the vulnerability of the people that live there, FEMA data around property loss, severe repetitive loss and repetitive loss, and then land use and land cover. And by stacking all that information together and really understanding what those risks are, it starts to tell a story about what to plan for. Go ahead, Samantha. If looking at a map isn't the way that you can best get information, don't worry. We have another tool for you. That's our Snapshots tool. This is our newest tool. And this is where we really break down into tabular and graphical format what the data behind the maps is showing. So here again, I've pulled up Atlantic City. I'm looking at the built infrastructure and what might be exposed across different water levels on the ground. And if a graph or if a table doesn't work for you, next slide, we also provide that to you in a graph. And so you can take these images straight out of the snapshots that we provide. You can stick them into your own planning documents or your own PowerPoint, use them as part of a public meeting, and really get across the story, maybe combined with a map, combined with some pictures on the ground to talk about what is at risk in our local communities. Next slide. We also want to put the power of understanding about risk into the hands of the citizens of our state. And so we've recently also launched another website called mycoast.org, where we ask citizens to become scientists using that very powerful tool we all carry around in our pocket, our cell phone, to snap pictures and upload to the website photos of those places where there is high water. And we can use those pictures to go back and look at our flood models and then try to relate how much water is at these places that we think are so important that we want to protect along the New Jersey shore. Next slide, Samantha. So science was one of those puzzle pieces. Tools was another piece. And now I want to kind of end on sort of this overall last piece of the puzzle. And that is really thinking about the whole community when planning for resilience. Often we think a lot about built infrastructure, the buildings, the roads, what footprint gets wet when water rises, but there's so many other pieces of thinking about the whole community that need to be factored in as well. The ecological parts of the community, the overall governance of the municipality, the residents and the community resilience, and then the businesses. And it's all of those parts of the community working together that really forms what it means to be a whole community with resilience. Next slide, Samantha. One thing we've really come to appreciate over the past few years is how so many of our historically under-resourced community members are some of our most vulnerable community members. And while they might be resilient in terms of the networks they have in their communities and being able to rely on one another, there's underlying social factors, whether they're health or other conditions that they live in, that make them even more vulnerable to the changes that are going to be seen with climate change. And we've come to really appreciate that this is a special community that we need to work with. And whether that's community of color, our elder residents, lower income community members, those that are otherly abled or children, they all fit into this category of people that we need to add more seats to around the table when thinking about overall community resilience. Next slide, Samantha. The idea that we are working with communities to think about is that when we start to address things like social, economic, and physical challenges faced by the members of the community, overall, we're not just improving individuals, we're improving the overall health of the community. And we can't just think about how are the buildings or how are our visitors who spend, a few months at our community. We need to think about every part of our community, because in the end, our communities are only as resilient as the least resilient member of that community. Next slide, Samantha. The final tool I'm going to talk about really helps resilience planners really start to tackle how to think about adding more seats to the table and bringing those historically under-resourced community members into the resilience planning process. So in working with the state of New Jersey, we've developed an online training for resilience planners called A Seat at the Table, and it really takes resilience planners through those steps they need when thinking about how to bring those classically underrepresented groups into the resilience planning process. Not only how to just check a box and say that they participated in a planning workshop, but as you're thinking about the resilience actions in your community, really thinking through how does that action have an impact on those who are most vulnerable in my community? Are we making their access worse? Are we making their risk worse by taking this action? And we really help resilience planners think through those steps. And it looks like it's cut off on the slide, but there is a web link at the bottom where you can access that online training material. Next slide, Samantha. So in closing, I'd just like to pose the question, what does it really mean to be resilient? We've talked about, next slide. We've talked about we need the science as the cornerstone piece. We need people like our group at Rutgers and other groups to provide technical assistance to communities to help them use that science to inform their decision-making. We have tools, we can put those to use, and we have really good planning. And when we think about the whole community, we're starting to get at resilience. But I still think, and I challenge us to continue to think about what are those parts of the resilience puzzle that we haven't yet tackled? What is that emotional part, that tie that brings us to the coast, that really makes us want to stay here, despite the fact that all the science shows that we are really putting ourselves in a vulnerable place by staying along the coastline. And so I leave an open question to the rest of the panel and to the audience of what does it really mean to be resilient, and how can we help communities continue to think about how to address that question beyond just thinking about the science, thinking about what's most important to the members of their community and really what it means to be resilient in the end. Thanks, Marge.
Thank you, Lisa. So, Lisa, you will be happy to know that I think we all could see that it wasn't cut off, by the way, on our screen and what I saw on my laptop here. So I think we're good on that front, but the slides will be available. Also, Lisa, for the folks here, you heard Professor Lysenko this morning speak about a report that came out of Rutgers, and the piece Lisa just mentioned, the seat at the table and the whole community planning, that is the report that Professor Lysenko was speaking about. So we're dot connecting as best we can here. So thank you. So let's cue up Fawn's presentation. Is that you, Fawn? Yes, it is. That looks familiar. Terrific. Oh, well, do you want me to? Yes, you have a mic.
Testing.
And
Can you
if
hear
you
me?
want, I can move this so that you can see a little bit better. Would that help you? Okay, great.
All right. Can you
So,
guys hear me? Is that working? All right. Okay.
yes,
Awesome.
so go right ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon. I'd like to thank Rutgers for allowing me to participate in this conference. And, Lisa just hit the nail on the head. We're all here to learn that flood risk, and we know that flood risk is increasing around the world. And we're participating in this conference today because we've seen firsthand that climate change is having an economic, environmental, and social impact on our homes and our communities. We're searching for effective tools to combat sea level rise and climate change. I'm here to discuss how buyouts have become a key component of our larger resilience strategy in New Jersey. Sea level rise is impacting New Jersey as acutely as anywhere in the world, and the only way to address that is through a multifaceted approach. The benefits of buyouts are that they move people from harm's way permanently, reduce the potential of financial and economic loss in the event of flooding, and it returns flood capacity to often largely developed areas. The NJDEP, as Lisa just defined, resiliency as the ability of a community to adapt and recover readily to adverse climate conditions, both present and future. Blue Acres implements an adaptive response through acquisitions. Next slide. This was for our German friends that were here to say welcome to New Jersey. I am the state land acquisition chief of the Green Acres program. That's a department in the Department of Environmental Protection. And I oversee acquisitions of land that become part of our systems of state parks and forests and natural and wildlife management areas. Thankfully, the voters over the last 60 years have recognized that we're the most densely populated state, and we needed to set aside funding to be able to compete against development in our most vulnerable places and to provide open spaces for our residents, plants, and animal communities. Green Acres was established in 1961. As I said, it's our 60th anniversary. And the mission for Green Acres is to protect, preserve, and enhance New Jersey's natural environment for public use and enjoyment. The Blue Acres program is under that umbrella, and it is the flood buyout program, and that didn't start until 1965. We started with just $15 million from the voters, and without being able to leverage any of that money to the feds, we used that money up relatively quickly. Next slide. And then in 2007 and 2019, we went back to the voters again, who approved bond acts. And I'll remind you that here in our country and in New Jersey, 2009, the market was not a happy time. But yet the voters of New Jersey recognized that as we were approaching build out, it's still critical for us to have those open spaces close to our homes. 2010, we won our first competitive federal grant using our FEMA dollars. And the rest is kind of history. We started working with FEMA directly and our state OEM folks. And then by the time Sandy came along, we volunteered ourselves to be the program that would offer to write the grants, implement the buyout programs, handle the demolitions for all these towns so they could work on cleaning up and getting their folks back to work. Next slide. This is a shot down in central Jersey in Burlington County. And the reason I stuck this one in there is primarily because this was a rain event that happened in 2019. It didn't amount to a disaster declaration where the federal government was going to provide us with funding, but we still had Sandy funding left over. And so we were able to hit the ground running basically with a test case to see how quickly could we respond to a community if we had enough money to do so. I'm happy to report that, I met with those folks in August of 19, and we did our grant, we got approval, and then you guys may recall something called COVID pandemic happened. We had to change our entire real estate process to a virtual platform to continue to work. And, we think about what COVID did for us. I mean, all we could think about at the program was what a family that had been impacted by flood, how they would have to survive with a flood, trying to get their lives together and dealing with COVID. So we worked around the clock to get that grant in place. And prior to a year, which, I've got people in the audience that have been through the program, so they know This process can take a year to 2 years to get started. With that money in place, we were able to get started on our closings in less than a year time during the pandemic year. Next slide. We're going to just go through the next few slides pretty quickly. These are just some of our Sandy communities that we helped. We're in 20 different communities and 10 different counties, from Bergen County all the way down to the Delaware Bayshore. And our Blue Acre projects have been undertaken in areas that are highly urban, industrialized parts of the state to remote rural shores of Cumberland County. In each place, the same devastating effects of climate change were evident, even if their challenges were different. Yep. So FEMA has told us that flooding is the #1 natural hazard for New Jersey. Since the 1950s, we've had over 50 presidential disaster declarations, and we've encountered more than 1,000 flood events just in the past 30 years. Increasingly, we're witnessing flooding in neighborhoods that have had no history of inundation in our riverine and bayshore communities. Next slide. This is what a community looks like after the homes have been demolished, purchased and demolished. So you could see this is basically a suburban community, and that red circle is a mailbox that somehow was left behind by the demolition company. And you can see there's some daffodils in the corner of the picture. The reality is the flooding is going to continue. You know, we can't lose sight of the fact that people have to start to making those adaptations. Next slide. This is just our program mission. The Blue Acres program helps New Jerseyans escape the risk of rising seas and more frequently in severe flooding. It creates buffer zones to mitigate future flooding and storm damage impacts, and puts these vulnerable lands back to public hands, giving state residents and visitors increased access to our waterways. In doing so, it helps the state to become more resilient to the effects of climate change, creating a stronger, fairer, and greener New Jersey. Next slide. Our criteria is simple. You know, we see it, we feel it, we know it. It rains a lot, we flood a lot, and so the most important of all criteria is having a family that's had enough and is willing to move on. The federal government, the state government, all the funding that is available to date does not allow for eminent domain or taking. And so the first thing we need to do is build a relationship with the families and the communities to make sure that they know what their options are, and that this option gives them the opportunity to move to higher ground. So the criteria is simple. Like I said, there's been repetitive flooding, you're a willing seller. As the state gets involved, we want clusters of homes so we can actually create and provide flood storage. It has to be cost effective. The federal government to this day makes us do a very tedious grant through a benefit cost analysis. And if you don't meet that criteria, the funding doesn't come in to help these families. So that cost effectiveness is critical. Next slide. And this is just, you know, to show that a picture is worth 1,000 words. You know, when we go into communities and we talk to our residents, what we want everyone to see is that impacted area. Now, this is an area that was impacted by Sandy, and you can see the reds and the blues there. These are storm surge maps, and we overlay where the applications are from people that want to sell their properties. We show the severe and repetitive loss claims from the National Flood Insurance Program. Like I said, we're showing the storm surge here. The people in this community, the storm surge was at 15 feet. And so these people were rescued from the second floors, the roofs of their homes, or the attics of their homes. That lower picture is one of the first applications we did. Sandy happened in October of 12. The administration created the statewide program in May of 2013. And from May of 13 to March of 2014, we were able to write a grant, buy a property, and have our first demolition in less than a year's time. So we were hellbound to get this happening. And we all know government takes a long time. And so that was important for us to get started and hit the ground running. Next slide. I think the importance here is with the community, and the next slide is also for the individual homeowners, and it's building a relationship. You know, we would meet with folks, and there were people in every single town that we worked in that were so motivated that they became the advocate and they became our partner in talking to neighbors at the coffee shop or organizing something at the community center or in the church. And we would go up as often as they wanted us to go up and answer questions. So the importance here is that we wanted to alleviate the burden from the communities, promote resilience, allow those floodwaters to be reabsorbed through the floodplain management of the community once those homes were gone, and to create open space. You know, again, we're under the umbrella of a conservation buyout program. And so that conservation and open space and public access is a critical part of what we're trying to accomplish here. And as for the homeowners, we're homeowner centric. You know, once that grant is written, we are advocates for those families. We want to understand if they're having trouble, if they can't find a place to live, if they're upside down on their mortgage, whatever their situations are, we would build the capacity to offer the assistance that we could to get them out of that home. We offer the pre-storm values. And so when a home, you saw some of those earlier shots, those pictures of homes that were damaged, we were able to offer a pre-storm value looking at that home as if the storm had never happened. And it seemed to work. The farther out you get from a storm, values start to come back, the sun shines, people forget that it's going to rain again. But we were able to successfully help a lot of families that way.
Can I ask Samantha to just go back one slide, because she went through the first slide, because you had two slides with the
Yes.
benefits and it was kind of fast. So I want to make sure
Okay.
people could see that. There you go.
All right.
Just give people a
Yes,
sec.
sure.
Public safety, resiliency, absorption of flood waters,
Yep.
open space.
Yes.
Thank you.
And there are so many more benefits for the community. I mean, when we look at the emergency service costs, I can't tell you how many communities said that even the loss of that tax rateable from that home no longer being there, the cost of the emergency services, and then the CRS benefit for reducing flood insurance rates for the rest of the people in the community was a good trade-off.
And what in lingo, CRS is the community rating system that
My
the
apologies.
National Flood Insurance Program works. It's a good thing I'm here,
Yes, it
you
is
know,
a good thing.
keep
We're
you honest, Fawn.
a tag
but-
team.
But the other thing was, so I actually do want to ask a question, because we do have one in the chat, and I'm just, I want to just make sure we have the right nomenclature. So Rich O'Pekin, hi Rich, good to see you online. Rick's asking, are the buyouts at fair market value or below market? There are homes on Barrier Islands valued in excess of $5 million. Convincing these families to get out of harm's way would be difficult due to the high financial loss. Response
is most of the folks on the coast aren't interested in being willing sellers yet. You know, we're not taking any properties. There's no eminent domain. So we go where the people want us. We have a tremendous amount of riverine communities throughout our state that are impacted by floods. And so we, like I said, with Sandy, we went to 20 different communities that asked for our help. So the reality is we spent, you know, almost $300 million just to do that from Sandy. So we're going where we wanted. As far as value, it's pre-storm value. The question on whether or not a home is worth $300,000 or $1.5 million all comes down to that benefit cost analysis. And so what FEMA wants to do is to make sure that there is a benefit to making that property go away, as opposed to continuing to pay for the flood insurance claims.
So does pre-storm equal fair market?
No. Okay. So, all right. So pre-storm value would be the current market value of your home the day before the storm occurred. And so the way that data valuation, when we do our appraisals, if the storm happened on August 31st and your home has been damaged, we're going to value your home on August 30th. And so it would be the current market value of the day before the disaster occurred, meaning the closest date to compare to the market based on the home not being impacted by a storm.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I apologize.
No,
I do
no,
this stuff
no.
every day for
I think
25
we
years.
answered your question, Rich, but thank you. Keep going.
All right. Where was I? All right. Next slide. So we had that. And again, individually, what we do for the community and the individual homeowners is try to do as much as possible. Like I said, we write the grant, We do the full real estate transaction. We demolish the homes. We grade and seed the properties. The towns will manage the properties for us through a memorandum of understanding. And hopefully the homeowners are, we get clear marketable title. So hopefully there's a proceed for that family to walk away with so they can start over again on higher ground. Next slide. And these next couple of slides are just more of the community maps that we were in. You can see, we're here, what we do, we're not even using the 100-year storm, we're using the 500-year storm to show the damage. Just trying to move forward from some of the older FEMA mapping to kind of guide us, but to look forward with some of the new science that we're seeing out of Rutgers and my department, Department of Environmental Protection. So what you see in green are properties that we've purchased, and the yellow dots are more of the applications that have come in. So you can see it's not difficult for us to look at where we should be. And those are just families that have said, again, that they've just had enough. Next slide. Just another urban community here. You can see the city of Linden. You can see the tank farm just off the way. This was a interesting project in that we had great success. Those homes were in a really high flood risk area. And we had such success that we were able to work with the refinery to do a restoration project. And so that was our first public-private partnership after the success of actually getting all of the homes out of that buyout area. Next slide. We simplified the process for homeowners into 5 steps. It's honestly about 55 steps, but we group it so that they understand what their homework is and what our requirements are. We basically, once we write that grant, we have a kickoff meeting, and that is the start of their project as being approved. It's a private meeting only for the families that are in that approved grant, and they do a little homework for us there. We've already gone out to bid for the appraisal, the title work, the survey work, everything that needs to be done. So that meeting might be on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. By Monday of the next week, there are people out, they're getting calls, they're getting letters from appraisers saying they want to value the property. So they feel that government is starting to work. We do a face-to-face offer. I have a set of case managers whose sole purpose it is to just hand walk these families through the process. And so if they can't take off of work, my guys will get into a state car and they will drive to their office and they will meet with them on their lunch break and explain what is necessary. So we try to accommodate them as much as possible to give them that face-to-face offer, explain the documents, the written offer. And then if they say yes, we go to contract, attorney review, and closing. Next slide. Some of the challenges and barriers, I know there's a lot. And we don't have enough time to go over all of them. I have to say that getting money as quickly as possible after a disaster is the most important thing. Families are getting insurance claims, are already starting to fix up their houses. And once you fix up your house and the sun is shining, you have a beautiful day like today, you're like, maybe I'll stay. Maybe it won't rain again. Maybe we won't have another storm like that. So being able to get that money to get those families out of harm's way before they put all that money into fixing the house up, I think is critical. Flood disclosure is another one. I can't tell you after Ida how many families that we have talked to already that just bought their home a month ago or 5 months ago, and they didn't know that it was in a flood zone. So, we could say buyer beware, but the reality is if we had disclosure, those people would have something to do. I apologize. Go away. All right. So some of the great innovations, we do appraisal appeal. You don't like your appraisal number, you can go get your own. And then we hire a third independent to take both of those reports and try to give you the best price possible. We had a lot of folks who are upside down on their mortgage. And so we built a mortgage team to negotiate on those owners' behalves. And we've had great success with that as well. A lot of folks fix up their homes and the families have nightmares and they're like, I'm not living there anymore, but we have a mortgage. And so they rent the properties out. So we had to build a tenant relocation program so that we could make sure those tenants were moving also to higher ground. So those are some of the innovative things. Challenges first and solutions second. Next slide. Post demolition. Yeah, this again is Linden, that one town I had told you about. And so once a property is purchased and, the improvements are demolished and removed, we grade and seed. It's deed restricted for conservation and passive recreation purposes. And so that is what we are trying to accomplish there. Next slide. This is Woodbridge Township, and this is after about 170 homes have been removed from this area. The town was innovative in that they changed the zoning to and put an ordinance in place to make this a conservation zone, meaning that residents that were still there in homes could stay, but no new construction was allowed. And when they sold the properties, they had to be at the right flood elevation so that the town didn't have to spend the emergency service dollars to go in and rescue them. Next slide. These are just some before and after shots of one of our Delaware Bayshore areas. You could see the homes, I know, on the end, and then the after with the homes and the pilings removed. It's a beautiful place, and this is open to the public. Next slide. Okay, some of the keys to success. I think I missed a slide. Okay. So some of the benefits here, obviously, we're getting folks to higher ground. We're adding flood storage. We're going into these neighborhoods, and we're in New Jersey. So we're not just going in and removing a whole neighborhood of people. We're being very strategic and removing the people that are closest to those riverine streams. And hopefully that's allowing enough flood storage to create a healthier community for the families that still remain in that community. We reduced public and residential costs related to emergency services. And I can tell you, I've had lots of towns tell me that first it's a loss of rateable, but now they've enhanced the value of the homes that are left behind, and that emergency service cost has been diminished. Next slide. Key to success. My team, yeah, just dedicated people. The hardest part of this job is being able to have enough time to listen to people and be there. And once you can gain their respect and they know that they've been heard, nobody likes the situation. Nobody even likes the value that you give them for their home. But the reality is they understand that you are doing the best that you can, given the circumstances and the funding requirements. There are always strings attached to every dollar. And so, like I said, once that money comes in and we've written the grants, we're all about advocating for these families. A strong IT, I can't tell you, Lisa has said it, and there are plenty of delightful tools out there with Flood Mapper and other things that we have, but we need those GIS maps. People, the governing bodies of these communities, they need to see those inundation levels. They need to see where we were and what's coming so that they can plan long-term for the future to make good, smart, strategic decisions. And then creating partnerships with everyone, the local governments, the grassroots groups, the federal funders. Everybody needs to understand that we're collaborating and we're all on the same mission of trying to get folks out of harm's way. And then it's just a hands-on service. The federal paperwork, the state paperwork is daunting. No one should have to go through that experience without having someone to assist them. And so we have case managers, those ladies in that shot there. Literally, like I said, they go out, they'll talk to the families day or night. They have cell phones, they have access to cars. And so we try to meet the homeowners, where they need to be met. Next slide. Okay, and these are just some drone shots that we have here. This is another area of our Delaware Bayshore. That's kind of a before. Next slide. And that's an after. Next. All right. And these are just our stats of where we are. Like I said, started back in 95 and had about 300 homes purchased. We started Sandy in 13, and we've done about, just about 780 closings to date, with 712 of those demolished. You can see the debt forgiveness there, about 5.7 million in debt forgiveness for families. And I think the largest was about $300,000 in debt forgiveness. Tenants have been relocated. And then, as I said earlier, about 20 municipalities in 10 counties. I think the next slide should be it. Oh no, just a couple more real quick. They're just Ida. So, here we are ending Sandy, looking forward, creating a proactive program on social vulnerabilities and how we build capacity to look holistically at these communities moving forward. And then Ida hits. And so here we are again, just, September 2021. Next slide. And this is what's still happening because there's no disclosure. We still have people selling their homes in flood prone areas. And some homeowners were able to say, I could walk away because we didn't close yet. Others said, I just bought my home 4 weeks ago and now it's gone. Next slide. And these are just some Ida shots I throw in for you guys to kind of see that this is not something that's going away. Next. It's not at the shore. These are all riverine communities, either inland areas. These are all Manville, by the way. Next. That's it. I think that should be it. Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you, Fawn. That's I'm always in awe of what you and your staff accomplish. Really am. We're going to try to make up some time here because we got started a little late. So now for Barbara, who will speak to us about Atlantic City and what it has chosen for its path moving forward in the face of sea level rise. Barbara, we're all waiting with bated breath to find out what you have to say about where Atlantic City's going. So if you can take us to there, Samantha and Barbara.
Okay. Before I begin, I've known Fawn for decades now, and I'm embarrassed to say that as we watch our families grow in age, it's always great to work with Fawn. So Fawn is definitely a person of her word, and she does everything she can to help with the state of New Jersey. So we are always great with that. Thank you so much for Rutgers and the opportunity to speak today. And as you can see in my background, I am sitting on the 5th floor in Atlantic City with the casinos and the county building in the background. So we're still here. We're not going anywhere. It is a beautiful day. And yes, Fawn is absolutely right. The absence kind of glosses over those things. So in looking at this, Atlantic City is a bit unusual. So if you could go to the next slide, we're going to go through some of Atlantic City very quickly. For those of you that are not from the area or not familiar, where are we? We are 60 miles southeast of Philadelphia and 125 miles south of New York. So we're kind of headed farther down the coast, if you will. Next slide, please. So what are we best known for? Boardwalk. We had our first construction in 1870 and it was at grade on the sand. Our beaches are one of our finest assets, but it's also a double-edged sword, as you're seeing. Miss America pageant has always been very popular. Unfortunately, it's taking place in New York these days, or I'm sorry, Connecticut these days, but we're still known for that. Monopoly. Our streets, my 14-year-old daughter who is special needs said to me as she loved Monopoly, Mom, I've noticed all these streets. This is just like the game of Monopoly. And I said, yes, dear, it is. So it was reassuring that she's seeing that as we come through the next generation. One of the shots that I have here in the photograph is the Absecon Lighthouse. It's a beautiful structure. It's actually a few blocks south of the tip and 2 blocks in from the edge of the ocean because it had been built all the way out in the end. Due to man-made land being filled, it's no longer at the end. So it was decommissioned, but it's a wonderful historic artifact. Casinos. That is probably one of the things we are most renownedly known for. 1978 was a bellwether year for Atlantic City. 1976, they legalized gambling and we saw our first casinos come to fruition. One of the other places that we are definitely known for is landfall for Superstorm Sandy. If you're looking at the photos that are on the slide and you look at the one that is in the right on the bottom, that is at the very northern edge of the city. And as you see in between the white lines of the foamy surf, that was the boardwalk. That's what's left of it, which is simply the underlying piles and underpinning. It was completely gone in other places. So the last thing we're most famously known for is Boardwalk Empire, the series. And of course, much to our chagrin, it was filmed somewhere else. If you'll go to the next slide, please. So here's some basic information. And by the way, my sister made a recommendation. I took it to heart and I wrote down some numbers. So what are we? We are a resort city. And obviously we're here, we're talking about sea level rise. It runs and reverberates so deep with us because we have to make very difficult decisions all the time. So we were established as a health resort in 1854, located on an 8.1 mile Absecon Island. We are south of Brigantine. We have neighbors to the south, Ventnor, Margate, and Longport. So here's where the calculations come in if I did this correctly. For those of you that are not from the United States and use different measurements, the city is 17.22 square miles. And if I've got it correctly in hectares, it's 4,459, almost 4,060 hectares in size. We are 10,067 acres is what it translates to. And we are fondly also dubbed as the 48 blocks because that's how long we are. Basically, we are 10.76 square miles of land. That's 62% of our land area, and that equates to about 2,708, almost 87 hectares of land. That does include wetlands. And then for our area of water, we are 6.45 square miles or 1,600 and approximately 70 hectares of area with that. What I have shown in red is the average elevation for the city is 7 feet above sea level. We're right here. We are living it. And this is based on the 1988 North American vertical datum. I will explain it was done in 29 and 88. The difference is, depending on where you're at in the coast, 1 to 3 feet change in sea level during that time. So some points in our city are as low as 3.88 feet above sea level. We're almost in the water. So as you can see, we have some challenge with this, which is part of the reason why I'm speaking today. So if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, here we go. Just to give you an idea of what Atlantic City is, it's a little small, it's a little hard to see, but we have 11 distinct neighborhoods. And in 2020, our population, unfortunately, we're still ever so slightly losing some population, but they say that there are statistics out there which explains the next one. When you have a high percentage of immigrant population, it's estimated that up to 30% of the residents are undercounted in the census. So we were about 38,000 before, we're 39,000 before, we've lost around 1,000 residents. 31.6% of our population is foreign born. 37 different languages are spoken in our school systems. We have approximately 20,429 units of housing. Our average or median value of housing is $156,700. To give you an idea, for Atlantic County, that's actually 3/4 of the value of an average median home in Atlantic County and half of the value of a home in New Jersey. So if we go on to the number of households, we have 15,504 households. Our median income is another stunning figure. Our average or median income is $29,232. If you look at this, when you're comparing it with the rest of the state, we're at half of the median income of Atlantic County, and then we are 1/3 of the median income for the state of New Jersey. So for me, that's revealing. It's a little intimidating, and sometimes it's very challenging. The next statistic is also mind-blowing. 37.1% of our population is below the poverty level. And one of the things that we're talking about today is the issue of inclusion, equitable situations. So as you can see, just from these statistics, Atlantic City, we are really there. We have populations that are underserved. It is amazing to deal with the residents on a regular basis. It's one of my favorite parts of the job, believe it or not. Some days I live to regret that, but our population, one of the things that I didn't put on the slide that we are also most well known for is we are constantly reinventing ourselves. And that is due to the population, the influx of new families, the influx of new minds, new thoughts, new out-of-town ideas, as you can see by our population. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, please. This I threw in just for interesting knowledge. When you're looking at us, the red line is the city's average, and these are based on 4,000 different reports that were compiled to take the readings. The lighter green or brighter green is the average of the precipitation in the United States, and it's broken down by month. What's funny and surprising with this, our typical average precipitation drops in June, but look at July and August, and then it bottoms out in September. This is consistent with the hurricane season, everything that happens, and on the whole, we receive more precipitation on an average than most of the United States. So for me, that was a fascinating fact because it ties everything in together. Next slide, please. So we participated in the Atlantic County Coastal Resiliency Study. It's Brigantine, our neighbors Brigantine, Margate, Longport, Ventnor, Atlantic City, the county, other major stakeholders, and 2 communities on the mainland, which were Pleasantville and Northfield. One of the things that the study documented is what is our average sea level rise going to be just about 50 years from now, or 2070. And what the slide shows is that we're going to have an average sea level rise of almost 2.5 feet. It's 2 feet 5 inches. It's pretty much consistent with what we've seen from the trends from the 1929 to 1988. And again, it's another 100 years. It's going to keep rising. So what does this mean for the city? If you go to the next slide, please. We had 2 choices. And it basically comes down to human psychology, flight or fight. So flight means retreat. Do we retreat? Do we just kind of close our doors? Do we move onto the mainland and call it a day? Or do we fight? And by fight, I mean build back better, more resilient, and focusing on sustainability. So what did Atlantic City do? If you'll go to the next slide, please. If you look at this map, this is from the Atlantic County Coastal Resiliency Study. Now, this takes in all of Atlantic County, so parts of it are Atlantic City, but it's looking at the county as a whole and the Barrier Island particularly. The big number is on the left-hand side of the page, and it says regional vulnerability. 656 structures are or may be vulnerable to inundation by 2080. Under this intermediate rate. So this didn't even look at casinos. And casinos, we are down to basically 9 casinos now. We had 13 at the boom and peak of everything. And in looking at all of this, so we had to make a hard decision. When I came here almost January, we had the start of my 4th year, we were in flux with a lot of things. We've survived the state takeover. We've survived Superstorm Sandy. We've survived COVID. And as I said, we always continually rebuild ourselves. So in looking at this, one of the things that the city really, really strongly had to consider is where are we going from here? Well, part of the state takeover has been wonderful. The state has been an excellent partner. They have partnered with us in doing a lot of different things. We chose to rebuild. We chose to stand our ground, even if it's the sand under our feet. So what we chose to do is work with the state to develop resiliency programs that will help with the city. One of the things that it did was forced us to actually do a capital improvements program plan for the city to determine where our needs were, how to prioritize them, and then when funding becomes available, how to deal with them. So fortunately for us, there is a tranche of $21 million that was given to the city to help us with our resiliency efforts. Part of what we're doing with them are bulkheads. We did not have a minimum standard height for a bulkhead. We've since changed that. We're now at 8.2 feet, which we will evaluate that as time goes on. One of the other things that we're doing is we are working with pump stations to pump out as quickly as we can and get the water back out, back away. The other thing that we are also doing is we have an unusual situation we actually have a canal that runs right through the middle of the city. It's called the Baltic Avenue Canal. It's underground. Most people don't know it's there. They never see it, but it's actually there. The infrastructure is almost, I want to say 150 years old because it was built as the city was being built. So we are we've got money to take a look at it, video it, see what's going on, see how intact the infrastructure is, and see where we need to make improvements if necessary. Part of the reason why we chose to rebuild is the impact of Atlantic City on the region. What was stunning to me is when we first developed casino gambling, the area at its peak had 42,000 jobs in the casinos. That's more than the population of Atlantic City that works in the casinos. The other thing that I found fascinating is every county of our 21 counties throughout the state, somebody from each of those counties works for the casinos. So for me, it's not only a local impact with the casinos, it's a regional impact, and then it's a statewide impact. And it's also for the area between New York, Philadelphia, and Washington. So we have a tremendous responsibility in the city because it is it's an awesome economic driving engine. I was stunned to read that we have $34.5 billion a year at our peak that we were attracting in tourist economy. So it's a little hard to walk away from that. And everybody says, well, what's your buyout? What's your number? That's always what we look at and it's an awfully big number. So what have we done? We've done a boatload of planning studies and efforts to try and do what we can to minimize the damage and maximize our value here in the city. We've done a watershed management plan. We have also done a floodplain management plan. And as part of all of the new planning efforts that are coming through, again, we did the Atlantic County Coastal Resiliency Plan and our brand new master plan that we were about to unfold until the state adopted a regulation that indicates that when you adopt a brand new land use element, you have to incorporate a very specific sustainability and resiliency element. So we got a little delayed, but we're okay with it. And we had the state evaluated, and they've indicated that we've made excellent progress and we're going to move forward with it. So we are doing everything that we can to plan properly moving forward, recognizing that we are living on the edge of a cliff sometimes. And basically, just to let you know where the city stands with development, we have new projects that have come in. We have a 65,000 square foot expansion for the Atlantic Care facility that will hold a fetal medicine center, dialysis. It's also going to be a nutrition center, a learning hospital with a potential dental clinic. Stockton Phase 2 is coming through with their dormitories for 450 more dwelling units. We have the redevelopment of the Trump Plaza site. We also have Busby Village and Stanley Homes. Stanley Homes was the first public housing project in New Jersey. It's going to be rebuilt as part of our Choice Neighborhood Housing Program. We have Midtown in Motion. We are doing multiple neighborhood planning efforts for each of our 11 communities. A lot of these overlap, they dovetail. It's working wonderfully because we are concentrating our growth in areas that have never occurred before. So we also have, just trying to look at my notes, I'm turning the last little bit of information in, and hopefully we will have our transit village designation very shortly from the state. So the city has made, we're taking the stand, we're doing what we can because we owe it to the state, the counties, the regional area to do what we can to maintain the economy. And everybody typically, oh, Atlantic City casinos, yes. The casinos are part of our fabric, but we've diversified in a lot of ways. We do what we call the EDS and MEDS package, which we are now working with Stockton, Atlantic Cape Community College, ACCCC, and we are also diversifying with the blue economy with wind, with as much as we can. We are looking at having a coastal resiliency center here within the city, and we are trying to do everything that we can to capitalize on the perilous place where we're at. So moving forward, we will try to make the stand, maintain it as best we can, and we have hope for the city moving forward for our future, for the direction. We have spoken with Fawn. She has presented with the city for the Blue Acres program. It's under consideration right now, and some of you may or may not be aware, it is an election year, so I get told half of what I want to do has to wait a few weeks, regardless of what the outcome will be, because we understand that politics drive this. So part of where we have the biggest I guess the biggest gap or the biggest need is our residents. As you saw with that 37% functioning below the poverty level, we have a high percentage of populations that are not Caucasian. And that drives into this equality and the equitable solutions for our residents. So we're trying everything we can to make it equitable for our populations. One of the challenges that we've seen is somebody's been in our home for 70 years. She gets her new NFIP flood insurance bill. It now makes the home unaffordable. So this is where we look at things, we have to consider it. Part of what we've done in the past is we have used our community development block grants to subsidize this at a certain level, because we're trying to keep people in the community as much as possible and promote home ownership. So it is a big challenge. It's something that we are working to embrace, to move through, and to move past, and hopefully be here for another 150 years to come. So any questions? And I guess that's it's the path less chosen. So if you have any questions, we are all
Thank
here
you.
for them.
Thank you, Barbara. You are in the proverbial trenches. So I'm
As
gonna
someone
ask, go ahead.
As someone deemed me because I had been at Mantoloking, and what was funny was one of Fawn's photos, it was the breach in Mantoloking right at the center of town where they lost 25% of their housing units. I was brought in shortly after that to become the zoning officer to rebuild that. As somebody deemed me in an article, they called me, I preferred the term seasoned veteran, but they were calling me a warrior and a champion because of having to deal with the coastal issues, the flooding, et cetera. So I've had a little bit of experience, and it is never easy. It's always unique, and we're hoping to embrace it and move past.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you to Lisa, Fawn, and Barbara. You took us on a tour, if you will. If Samantha can put both Barbara and, there we go, on the screen. And you need your microphone. Do you have your microphone? So we had a nice tour on what we need to consider for planning for sea level rise with usable science, equitable access to information, whole community participatory planning, acquisition and some restoration thrown in there as a tool in the toolbox, and how the iconic Atlantic City is facing down its future and steadfast, sticking to its guns, so to speak. So let's discuss a little bit more. So I guess one of the things, because of the nature of this conference, we don't have a whole lot of time, but we have some, and I will get to the questions in the chat as well, and some of the folks in here may have some questions for you as well. I guess what I wanted to know from my perspective is what you think might be some lessons learned that we could translate from all of the things you guys have worked on in coastal regions to inland regions. I mean, Fawn, you talked a little bit about the work you're doing in non-tidal areas, but I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to say, and then I might lateral it to Lisa and Barbara, so we can sort of go around the horn, if you will.
Can you hear me? Okay. All right. It's communication. I think that families have a difficult situation after being impacted by a flood, and they need to know what options that they have. They need to know all of the options and how easy it is or not to get to a place where their family is safe again. And I think that if we can educate folks and show them the real science of what and why they were impacted and what may come in the future, they might make an educated decision that's going to put them on higher ground. It's not for everybody. It's a difficult process, but I think the tools that are going to take us forward with climate change and sea level rise is being able to communicate with people at their level and showing them how they're impacted or what and when things are going to happen so that they can make choices for their families. I talk to families every day, and a lot of them, of course, right now are saying, we can't do this anymore. We can't do this anymore. We thought we wanted to elevate, but we have neighbors that elevated and they still had to move their car or they lost their car. And so, we can't just wait for the storms to educate these folks on the reality of what's happening. We have to find ways to present that information to the residents, to the community leaders, to help them understand there are lots of tools. And this is strategically, you know, buyouts are just one. I'm a buyout fan, so that's what I'm always going to talk about.
Lisa, you're on.
Okay, well, thanks. I'm gonna build off what Fawn said. I think the communications is so important. I think another thing that Fawn said earlier was the relationship building, the idea that you know, and I said this in my talk as well, you can't just show someone a data slide or just a map on a screen and expect them to emotionally get to the place where they're ready to do something. So another lesson learned for me is that we may have all the science in our back pocket. We may know the data in and out. And yet that's where my question is. It's like, there's still such a piece there that's really like, it's at the heart. It's like that below the next stuff that really, really is about why people really, they just want to be there. And so working with people around that value that like really connects them to that area and trying to help them with that, understand what that is. I think for me, like that's been the hardest part. And the lesson learned for me is that you can't just always lead with the science, that's really not what gets people.
Barbara, thank you, Lisa.
Wow. Okay, lessons learned. If I had a crystal ball, and hindsight is always 2020, we probably wouldn't be sitting here in Atlantic City presenting today, but that's not the case. I think communication is absolutely key. One of the struggles that I have as a planner is educating the public. And it's always a clear dialogue you think you've gotten through, but you're right, that human emotion, what's tugging at the heartstrings. And I'll be the first to admit, I got sand in my shoes when I came down here over 20 years ago and I moved to Margate. I've never really left the area, and I am still a Burlington County resident, but we jokingly call it the butt end of Burlington County. My heart is always here. I love being next to the ocean. It will be hard to leave. You know, someday I'll hopefully survive all of this, but that human emotion, it wrecks every piece of science that you present. It undercuts it at so many different levels. And I've learned that trying to talk science, it's great, it's facts. I'm a very fact-based person when I make presentations, but I know some people, they just don't want to hear it, or they hear it, but they don't want to get it. So patience, persistence, following through with that, and understanding the human emotion that's driving why people want to be here also helps me with my patience through the whole process and dealing with the residents that, yes, I understand. And I know I've had a couple communities where, yeah, this is the third flood. I'm done. I can't take it. We are selling. And it's like Fawn said, we're out of here. We're not doing this. Let it be somebody else's problem. And then you have others that say, well, you know, I'm just going to sit through one more time. And then after that, for us, we've learned it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when the next storm event is going to come. Each of them gets significantly worse, and we just try to deal with it and manage it as best we can. And sometimes that's a small victory. So for us, those are the lessons that we've learned. And Atlantic City is very resilient. We are nitty and gritty. And basically because of that, that human nature and factor is so important here. And we will try to do everything that we can to manage the expectations, work with that, and do the smart, sensible thing. That's why we're doing so much planning.
And I think, Fawn, you sort of hit upon something in terms of, we're talking about this sort of issue of tolerance or threshold and what triggers people. And I think there's also just memory. You all sort of talked about that, right? And so I remember work we had done where we looked at folks down and down now near, was it Lisa, now near Little Egg Harbor in that area, where people had said if we had showed up earlier, they would have been willing to take the buyout, but you know, it's sort of it sort of faded, right? So is there something you're able to do? You said you sort of mentioned, you alluded to the fact, I think you actually mentioned that you've been so queued up with the post Sandy that you were able to hop in there and get in there faster. Is there anything else you want to elucidate in terms of thresholds and getting back to people quickly, if timing is such a big important factor here?
And timing is the ultimate factor. Because we had money in that Burlington County town that we went into, we were able to meet with those people and not make them wait. You know, when you look at the federal process, after a storm, you know, they wait 30 days or so for someone to come in with individual assistance. And then it's another 6 to 8 months before we figure out how much money is coming into the state, another 3 months to write a grant, and then to go through the process. And by then, somebody's gotten the permits, the mud's out of the house, they cut out the drywall, and the fans have dried the floors, and they've replaced what's necessary, and they're tired. And so they have the trauma of the storm, and then they're tired. And so it's like, you know what, I'm just gonna cross my fingers and hope it doesn't happen again anytime soon. So if we could get that money, and I've been shouting it from the rooftops, that we need to get money from IDA. We need money now. We don't need to wait until that lock-in amount is established for each of the states that were impacted. But if people are getting insurance claims and they're starting to fix up their structure, they're fixing up their structure, and then they're tired and they're staying. But I can tell you, folks are having nightmares. Their kids are having nightmares. You know, I talked to a family just yesterday. They talked about, you know, their kids couldn't sleep because they said the brown water is going to get them. So it's traumatizing. And for a family, it's, I have to get out of here now, or I have to make the house look like it used to look so that the family can feel safe again. And so timing is everything.
And I can attest to the fact that the trauma has been something we've been looking at, folks in the school social work and folks that work on education with children. We actually have done some training for teachers in terms of climate and anxiety in children. And we hear a lot of these anecdotes. I didn't know, Lisa, if you had anything you wanted to add to this conversation.
Well, I guess the only thing I would add, I don't have the same experience Fawn does working at the local level with individual decision making. But I do think these decisions, depending on who you're talking about, they do all have different timeframes. Some people are trying to make a decision about how they're going to get to work the next day or how they're going to put food on the table. It's like literally like a 12-hour by 12-hour decision. Other people, you know, we want to show data out to 2050 or 2100, and people can only think like the next election cycle or the amount, the who's going to be in, you know, the mayor's seat for that long. And
Right.
so it's challenging when you have so many different scales of decision making and so many different timeframes to try to line up. Even visioning out to a certain time frame is hard because people have trouble visioning, you know, a week from now, let alone what do they really want to see, you know, 30 years from now. They know they want to get their mortgage paid off. That part they can decide, but I think the timing thing is really difficult.
So I want to switch gears a little bit because we alluded, and there was a comment in the chat or a question. Are there any innovations or emerging concepts or tools or policies or pilot programs here in the state or other locations that you see as emerging that have great promise or are worth a deeper dive? Things like something you haven't talked about already, like lease buyback. Like if you bought the property and you sold it, you acquire it, and then you would lease it back to the homeowner, or any kind of planning tools or infrastructure decisions that could relocate assets, or regulatory changes like overlay zones or TDR, like transfer development right tools. I didn't know. I thought maybe I'd throw that to Barbara first, and then maybe Fawn. And
Okay. What have we learned? Obviously, rebuilding, when you choose to rebuild, it's important to rebuild to the code that needs to be set. We've done everything we can to embrace the NFIP code to make ourselves more sturdy and to be more resilient in the process. In looking at everything, you mentioned the CRS rating. We're doing everything we can to bring that down. We're going from, I think we're a 6, we're about to plummet through a 5, 4, and we're headed for a 3 because of all of our efforts, the raising, the elevating of our homes to help the residents to be able to afford to stay longer and make different and better choices. So for us, politics is always a tough thing. As I said, being persistent about what is being presented, educating the public, programs that are out there that are available. For me, it's finding out the most recent thing I can. And one of the things that we just found out is the NFIP program is changing how they're evaluating what your flood insurance premium will be. It is now not only based on a Superstorm Sandy event, but it's now based on regular average flooding. It's going to, and we are bracing for this, it's going to potentially dramatically impact the insurance rate premiums down here in our municipality and in this area. So trying to have all of that top cutting edge information so that we can inform everybody as much in advance as possible is one of the things that is helping us to stay a bit ahead of the curve. So for me, it's constantly researching, it's looking at articles, it's looking at the latest thing that's out there, educating myself so that I can do the right thing by the constituent population, the casinos, everybody, our stakeholders, the state, because everybody's vested here in Atlantic City. So for me, it's just finding out what's out there and doing the best that I can to broadcast it and get the message through loud and clear so that it's understood. Here are programs that are available. Here's what's out there. These are changes. We need to be aware of them and be mindful in the decision-making process. We're also now looking to incorporate greener design standards as part of our ordinances. And I don't mean because recreational marijuana passed. I mean truly doing stuff with infrastructure, bioswales, things like that, because that does seem to help with the process.
Great.
So again, it's just the cutting edge technology that's going to service the community and help us to do the best that we can and help our residents.
Yeah, Fawn.
We're looking at expanding the program. It's not just an acquisition demolition program anymore when you deal with these individual families. Like I said, we do, help with upside down mortgages. We're helping with relocation. Moving forward into the future, we're going to look at social vulnerabilities. Each of these families, we heard some of the numbers that Barbara talked about, income rates in Atlantic City. To buy a structure anywhere, you're not going to be able to afford that. So we're looking at helping the family from the time of the disaster all the way to their new home, to a healthier community. And so we're looking to expand, like I said, bring in those social vulnerabilities, be able to offer real assistance as each of these families need something to have a peaceful, higher ground home moving forward.
Great. Lisa, did you want to contribute to this in terms of what you see coming down the horizon?
Well, I'll be really quick because I see we're up, time's up.
We're pretty close to time, but
Yeah.
we're going to go probably about 5 more minutes because we started late. But if people can hang on.
I think
Okay.
the most innovative thing that I'd like to mention is our work at Rutgers through the Climate Change Resource Center to train the next generation of professionals. So really engaging those students at the undergrad and grad school level, educating them about how to communicate science, getting them involved in this on the ground work so they have a real experience about what it means to work at the local level and to try to apply science and all this great information at the local level. So I'd say that's our innovative thing. It's very interdisciplinary. It takes all different types of minds to make the puzzle fit together. So that's what I would contribute.
Yay.
I want to ask you one more question, then I'm going to give the folks here in the room an opportunity. I think I pretty much hit most of the questions that I saw in the chat. But I wanted to ask you if you wanted to impart 1 or 2 anecdotes about something that's really surprised you, that in your either positively or negatively, however you might phrase that, or a situation that caught you by surprise in all the years you've been working on this stuff. I know that puts you on the spot, but if you can think of anything where you just, I sort of feel like these are instructive bits of information. If you have one, does anyone have one? You can raise your hand if you do. Barbara.
I actually do. When I was at Maniloki, I wanted to find out, being the planner that I am, how many of the homes would be rebuilt and how many would be raised and how many would just kind of be left there. So Maniloki is a very different community from Atlantic City. Their demographic population is quite different, and they have, most of the residents have a bit more financial resources. So when people come in to talk to me about what they were going to do, there was a family that came in and we were talking about potentially raising the home that they had, and it got hit pretty hard by Sandy. So I said, well, are you going to raise the home? You're going to rebuild? What are you doing? And they said, well, we've just made a decision that we're going to kind of let things as they are. And I looked at them, I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Please explain why. Educate me. What the family said is, we have 10 members. The house it's owned by a trust. There are 10 members of this trust. Have you ever tried to get 10 members to agree on something? And I kind of started chuckling because I could see where this was going. So I said, okay, so you're just going to leave it this way. I said, do you understand when you go to sell this, the next person won't be able to buy flood insurance? Oh, absolutely. I said, so how's this going to work for you? You just write your own check and tearing down the house? They said, no, 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 no. We placed $150,000 in a trust account, knowing that that's at least the hit that we're going to take on the house because it's going to be a tear down. So the family is already anticipating that. That was the most, I think, eye-revealing thing and eye-popping thing that I experienced, because here's a family that they know what's going to happen. They know the inevitable is coming. They're still going to enjoy it while they can, and they know that they're not going to be here for forever either. So they made a few different choices. That was their choice. And I think that was probably one of the most surprising things that I got to understand. And as a result of conversations like that, and I was spot on the money, 25% of the homes in Mantoloking will never be rebuilt, raised, or elevated. They will just leave them in the family the way they are and wait for the next event.
Wow, interesting.
Mhm.
Lisa,
Yeah.
did you want to contribute anything?
Well, Marge, I love this question. It's kind of stumped me a little. You'd think I would have an answer right away. But I think the thing that, and it shouldn't surprise me, but I would say the thing that still gets me every time is that every single community is so different. I mean, while you can talk about themes that cross-cut across all communities, every single community has its own like little sense of culture, their own sense of what's an asset to them and what's important. Their own trusted sources or people that are like local advocates within their community. And it's really like, it's those individual nuances that make us love our communities. And it also makes the work we have to do so hard, because it isn't this one size fits all approach. It isn't what's going to work for Mantoloking isn't going to work for Atlantic City or isn't going to work for Cumberland County. And so I think it's that, 365 different municipalities. It's almost like we really need to be so individualized in our approach. And I know that shouldn't surprise me, but it just every time I learn something new about a community that I hadn't heard before from a different community.
I'm thinking
So
of
that's
Barbara's
striking.
I'm thinking of Barbara's 37 different languages.
I
in
know.
Atlantic City. Fawn. It's okay if you don't have something. It's all right.
I think it's not really an anecdote, but I just think that each community, as Lisa had said, it was refreshing that there was always someone, there was a leader in every community that would reach out and, you'd talk to them in the day, you'd talk to them at night, you'd meet them, you'd talk to them on the weekends, but their voice made such a difference. We were in one community in Woodbridge, and there was a woman there whose children were having nightmares, and she had had 3 storms. She was done. And a lot of her neighbors were just like, nah, we're going to stay. We're going to stay. She kept talking to them. She took her own money and she made lawn signs that said, have you completed your Blue Acres application yet? And she literally went house to house to house, met with these folks until, as I said, over 170 people in that neighborhood are now bought, their homes are demolished, and they're living on higher ground. So it's just those voices, those people that are willing to go the extra mile to make a difference. The Burlington County town I told you about, they waited for a flood disaster. When that declaration didn't come down, a neighbor went to Kinko's, printed out applications with her little sticky on it that said, my name is Mrs. Smith. I live at 123 Main Street. And she went up and down the street and put an application in every mailbox. They said they wanted me to come talk. It was a room full of 65 people. All 65 of those people came in to the application. So it's, they believe and they want the help, and they're going to listen to the state, and maybe they'll incorporate some of the science because they felt the flood, the water's in their homes. But it's those grassroots people that, thank goodness, are willing to go that extra mile to make it real, to make it, they're listening to someone else who's had that experience. And I can't tell you the difference that has made in every single community that we've been successful in.
Thank you. Anybody here have a quick question for these ladies? Anyone in this room? It's okay if you don't, because we know we're running over and it's late. I have one other question online, was asked about whether or not you prioritized any of the buyouts based on income or low income.
We don't look at income at all. I have said when I'm talking to others, the Blue Acres program is it's environmental justice at its core. We're talking about people that don't have opportunities, maybe to move on. I talk to people every day that now they have a flooded home with a mortgage and they're paying rent to live in a place, and they can't actually maintain or do both of those things and still feed their family and put gas in their car. So I think that repetitively flooded families, it is environmental justice, and we're trying to help all of those people, the best we can.
Thank you. Well, I have to say that every time I'm with this gang, I just am more inspired. But anyway, I want to give everybody a round of applause in person and virtually for taking the time to speak with us today. It was wonderful. I want to tell everyone that's online or in person that we're going to do a wrap up in Livingston Hall. If you're online, that would mean you would go to the panel 4 Zoom room for the closing comments. So panel 4 Zoom room for the closing comments. And I want to thank you again, Lisa, Barbara. We'll see you in person soon.